I was 21 years old and studied at a small university in Kansas. That Friday night, I stayed up late in the library preparing a paper and left around 11:30. The road that connected the campus to the city was long, almost 20 minutes driving through a desert stretch, surrounded by plantations and some abandoned warehouses. No one was passing by at that time, and the only light came from the headlights of my car. I put any playlist on the radio so I wouldn't sleep on the wheel and moved on. About 10 minutes later, I noticed something different in the rearview mirror. A black truck was coming behind me at a constant distance. At first, I didn't care. Truckers cross that highway all the time and most go straight, but this one didn't try to overcome. He remained in the same range, a few meters away, with low headlights and heavy rumbling engine. When he slows down, he did the same. When I accelerated, he followed. I tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, maybe someone going in the same direction, but the more time passed, the more uncomfortable I became. The pointer marked almost midnight, and that feeling of being followed began to squeeze my chest. I decided to test it. I turned the steering wheel slowly and entered a secondary exit of the highway, one of those rural roads without lighting. I waited for the truck to pass straight, but it made the same curve, keeping the same distance. My stomach turned. There was no other explanation other than that he was following me. The road was narrow, with corn on both sides and no house in sight. I turned on the flasher, slowed down, and watched through the rearview mirror. The truck also reduced it, the fixed headlights, almost blinding. When the fear started to really squeeze, I accelerated hard and went back to the main highway. My hands were sweaty, the steering wheel was slipping. At every turn, I expected the truck to disappear, but it always appeared again in the mirror, keeping the same distance, as if it were watching me. The fuel pointer was already near the end, and I knew I needed to get to the city soon. When I finally saw the first lights of the urban perimeter, a brief relief took me, but then the truck's headlights went out completely. The engine was still roaring, invisible in the dark, and the sound seemed closer and closer. I entered the city almost without thinking, turning the first corner I saw. The streets were empty, only a few flashing poles and the distant sound of a train. I looked quickly through the rearview mirror and saw nothing. No headlights, no shadow. I thought about stopping at a gas station, but something in me told me to keep driving until I was sure I was alone. I made several curves, passing through narrow streets between old buildings and closed warehouses. That's when, in the reflection of the side glass, I noticed a dark figure moving behind me. The heavy sound of the engine came back, muffled, without any light. At this point, fear became despair. I drove aimlessly, trying to find a busy place, but it seemed that all the streets were deserted. The sound of the truck came and disappeared, as if it were surrounding me through the alleys. I saw a traffic light flashing and I turned left, almost skidding. I stopped the car for a second, turned off the engine and waited in silence. All I heard was the sound of the wind hitting a can fallen on the sidewalk. For a moment I thought I had managed to mislead, until in the distance a metallic sound echoed. I engaged heavy gear and the noise of tires tearing the asphalt. The noise got louder and louder, the engine echoing between the empty buildings. I started the gear and accelerated again without looking back. The lights passed quickly through the windows and the sound of wet tires on the asphalt seemed to mix with the snoring of the truck that was now coming right behind. There were no headlights, only the huge shadow moving a few meters from my car, getting closer and closer. I turned right, then left, and the sound kept accompanying me, constant, heavy. When I finally saw the illuminated sign of a 24-hour gas station, I entered for good, braking sharply near the convenience store. For a few seconds, everything was silent. My heart was beating so hard that I could barely breathe. I waited for the truck to show up on the corner, but it never came. I looked at the mirror, at the street, at the alleys around, and nothing. No engine sound, no light. It seemed that he had completely disappeared. I got out of the car and entered the store, still shaking. The attendant asked if I was okay, and I could only say that I thought a truck was following me. He looked outside, curious, and said he hadn't seen anything happen. I stayed there for about 15 minutes until I calmed down, before driving home. When I got home, it was already past 1 in the morning. I parked in front of the garage and stayed a few seconds with the engine running. watching the deserted street through the rearview mirror. The neighborhood was quiet, only the distant noise of the wind passing through the trees. I entered quickly, locked everything, and left the lights on. I still felt that noise of the engine stuck in my head, as if it were echoing from afar. I went to the living room window and looked at the street once again. Nothing. No movement. No light. I tried to convince myself that it was just an ordinary driver going the same way as me, but something didn't go wrong. That seemed intentional. I lay down, but sleep didn't come. Every lighthouse that passed on the street made me get up to look. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a muffled sound coming from outside, like the snat of an engine shutting down. I went to the window, pulled the curtain just a little, and saw what made me freeze. There, stopped on the corner, was the same black truck. No headlights, no visible license plate, the engine off, but with the driver's silhouette visible by the dim light of the pole. He was looking in the direction of my house, motionless. I stood there for almost a minute until the truck started slowly and disappeared at the intersection, without turning on the lights once. Story 2. That night I was returning home after visiting my parents in a neighboring town. It was almost 11 o'clock, and the rural road where I usually drive was one of those long and without shoulders, surrounded by plantations and spaced poles. It rained weekly, and the constant sound of the water hitting the windshield made everything even quieter. I always drive slowly on this stretch because animals usually cross out of nowhere, so I immediately noticed when a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. It was a big blue truck with yellowish headlights and loud engine noise. I didn't bother at first. I let her approach, waiting for her to overtake, but it didn't exceed. He stood behind me, keeping an exact distance for several kilometers. Sometimes it disappeared in a curve, and soon after it appeared again. Slowed down to see if she passed me, but the driver did the same. The road was straight with no other exits, and the more time passed, the more I felt that discomfort growing in my chest. I turned on the radio just to have some sound besides the rain, but it didn't help. Every time I looked through the rearview mirror, I saw those motionless headlights following every curve I made. When the GPS indicated a detour, I turned to a secondary road, and the truck turned too. I began to feel my heart speed up. I tried to convince myself that it could be a coincidence, maybe someone going to the same destination, but that didn't seem normal. The secondary road was narrow dirt, and there was no reason for such a big car to pass by at that time. I looked in the mirror again. The headlights were still there, shaking with the swing of the road. I made a sharp turn to the left and accelerated, lifting dust. When I looked again, I didn't see the lights anymore. A quick relief made me take a deep breath. I thought I had finally misled. I followed for about 10 minutes, and the path began to get darker, with trees on both sides blocking part of the moonlight. That's when I saw something that made me freeze. In the reflection of the rearview mirror, the headlights reappeared exactly at the same distance as before. It was as if the truck had appeared out of nowhere, without engine noise, without an approaching headlight. Now, in addition to fear, came a strange feeling, that certainty of being watched. I picked up my cell phone and thought about calling someone, but the signal was dead. Just me, the sound of the engine and that weak blue glow reflecting on the bodywork of my car. I accelerated as much as I could, the wheels skating in the mud and the back of the car swaying in the curves. The noise of the truck engine grew behind me, constant, as if the driver was not afraid of losing control. The road finally ended at an intersection that led back to the main highway, and I turned without thinking. The headlights were still behind, blinking for a second and then returning to normal brightness, as if the driver was provoking me. When I started to see the first lights of a gas station ahead, the relief made me almost cry. I entered quickly, parking near the illuminated store. I stayed inside the car for a few seconds, trying to breathe. The place was almost empty. Only a truck stopped and the attendant smoking near the door. I looked through the rearview mirror, expecting to see the truck coming behind, but nothing. No sound, no headlights. I got out of the car slowly, looked around, and everything seemed normal. I went to the counter to buy a bottle of water and asked if the attendant had seen a blue truck passing by. He said yes, that he had seen one entering a little while ago and pointed to the side of the building. When I looked through the side window, my heart locked. The truck was there, parked alone near the pumps, the doors closed and the engine off. I left the store accompanied by the attendant, still trying to understand what was happening. The rain fell thinly, reflecting the lights of the gas station in the puddles on the floor. The truck was stopped about 10 meters away, the hood covered with drops and the windows completely dark. We got close enough to see that there was no one inside, neither in the driver's seat nor in the passenger seat. The attendant even opened his mouth to say something, but stopped in the middle of the sentence. The interior of the vehicle was dry, which meant that the doors had not been opened for a long time. Still, the engine was hot. I put my hand on the bodywork and I could feel the heat rising through the metal, as if it had been turned off seconds ago. The attendant let out a swear word and stepped back, saying that it was very strange. We went to the store to call the police, but when we looked out the window again, the truck was no longer there. No engine sound, no tire marks on the wet track, nothing. Only the empty space where she had been. I stood still looking out the window trying to understand how a big car like that could just disappear, without anyone noticing. For a moment I stood in front of the window hoping to see some movement, but nothing happened. The attendant, already suspicious, went to the pumps to check if someone had left the vehicle there. We walked together, and the closer we got, the more I realized that the floor around the truck was completely dry. No tire marks, no footprints, even with the fine rain falling. He touched the bodywork and confirmed what I already suspected. It was cold. That didn't make sense because less than 5 minutes ago the engine was hot. We stayed there for a while until the attendant, visibly uncomfortable, suggested that I call the police. I didn't want to. It seemed absurd to call just because a car appeared and disappeared. I went back to my car and stood still for a few minutes with the engine running, looking through the side mirror. Nothing. No sound. No light. I took the road back home, driving slowly, trying to convince myself that I was just tired. When I entered the neighborhood where I live, I looked at the clock. It was past 2. That's when, in the rearview mirror, for a second, I saw the blue headlights reflect on the back of my car. I came right away, but the street was completely empty. Story 3. It was almost 1 in the morning when I left work. I worked in a night warehouse on the outskirts of Des Moines, and that was my last shift before the holiday. The parking lot of the shed was practically deserted at that time, and the cold wind of the dawn made the dry leaves drag on the asphalt. I got in the car, turned on the heater, and started the usual journey, a journey of about 20 minutes to my house, almost all through secondary streets. I like to drive at night precisely because of the silence, but that morning something seemed different. In the rearview mirror, I saw headlights approaching too fast. It was a dark sedan, maybe black or gray, difficult to distinguish in low light. He was coming in a straight line, and for a moment I thought he was going to overtake. But instead, he slowed down and stood right behind me, a few meters away. I found the behavior strange. The street was completely empty, no reason for someone to drive so glued. I kept calm and turned right into a residential street, waiting for the car to move on. But he turned together. I turned on the blinker, made 2 more random curves, and he was still there, repeating every movement. That's when I started to feel my stomach tighten. The first thing I thought was that maybe it was someone lost looking for an address, but the way he kept the exact distance behind me didn't seem like a coincidence. The car had no license plate. I realized when I passed under the light of a pole and saw the smooth space with nothing written, not even a support. The detail made me freeze. I slowed down a little and looked at the rearview mirror. You could see someone's silhouette in the driver's seat, but the windshield was too dark to distinguish any face. I tried to take a deep breath and continued driving as if nothing had happened, but every headlight that flashed on the street seemed to make the feeling worse. I turned towards the main avenue where there is a 24-hour post. I thought that if it was a robber or someone trying to intimidate me, I would stop when I saw the movement. When I entered the avenue, the car accelerated and paired for a few seconds. The heart raced. I could see at a glance the shape of the vehicle, an old sedan, matte paint, no insignia on the front, as if it had been sanded. The windows were completely dark, reflective, and I couldn't see anyone inside. He kept the same speed as me, side by side, and for a moment I was sure he was going to throw the car against mine. I turned the steering wheel a little to the right and leaned the car on the sidewalk, trying to keep my distance. The sedan slowed down along, sliding slowly until it aligned with my side. I stood still, my hands sweating on the steering wheel, the engine still on. No one came down. No glass went down. Just the constant noise of his engine, rumbling low, firm, as if the driver was waiting for a reaction from me. I took my cell phone and dialed 911 with a trembling hand. When the attendant answered, I could barely speak. I told what was happening and asked them to send a car, giving the name of the avenue and the direction in which I was. While I was talking, the car next to him gave a short advance, lightly touching my door. The impact was so soft that it barely crumpled the metal, but enough to make me freeze with fear. The attendant asked me not to get out of the car and keep the engine running until the police arrived. That's when the sedan did something that made me even more confused. It started to reverse. Slowly, continuously, until it stops about 10 meters behind. The brake lights blinked and went out as if the driver had his foot on the pedal, undecided. Then, without any signal, the car turned to the opposite side and left, accelerating in the opposite direction until it disappeared in the curve. I stood there trying to understand what had just happened. The attendant was still talking to me, asking if the car had left and if I was okay. I said yes, but my voice trembled so much that I could barely finish the sentence. I kept looking at the rearview mirror, hoping to see the headlights come back at any moment, but the street was completely empty. A few minutes later, a vehicle appeared coming from the opposite direction. The police examined my car, asked if I had seen the license plate, and I explained that the vehicle simply didn't. One of them lit the asphalt with the flashlight and found fresh tire marks, stopping exactly where the sedan had backed up. While making the report, the officers commented that similar reports had happened in that same region in recent weeks. Always the same pattern: a car without license plates following drivers at dawn, appearing and disappearing for no reason. They escorted me to the beginning of my neighborhood and recommended that I avoid that route for a while. When I got home, it was already past 2. I left the car in the garage and sat for a few minutes, watching the street through the window. The silence seemed too heavy, and I swear that for a moment I saw the weak reflection of 2 headlights flashing at the end of the street before they went out completely. Story 4. I must have been about 12 years old when this happened. My brother Nate was 2 years younger, and at that time we spent a lot of time playing in the garage. It was one of those autumn nights with fine rain falling all the time and the sound of the drops hitting the metal roof. My parents were in the living room watching TV, and the house was quiet. The garage was the place where we kept everything: bicycles, tools, and my father's car, a silver sedan that he never let us touch. But that night, we decided to play hide-and-seek right there just for a change. It was the only space in the house that had enough dim light to make everything more fun. I counted to 20 while he was looking for a place to hide. I could hear the sound of the boxes being moved, the creak of the floor, and the noise of the wind outside. When I finished counting and opened my eyes, the garage was silent. I passed the flashlight behind the shelves under the bench behind the warehouse door, but I saw no sign of it. That's when I heard a muffled sound coming from inside the car, the noise of something beating lightly twice, followed by a short laugh. I approached and realized that it came from the trunk. I sighed and said I had already found it, but the noise suddenly stopped. I called his name and nothing. I waited a few seconds and hit the bodywork, thinking he was trying to scare me. The silence inside began to make me uncomfortable. I went to the driver's seat and pulled the lever to open the trunk, but nothing happened. It seemed locked. Then I heard the sound of something scraping inside, as if he was moving slowly. I hit him again, harder, and told him to stop joking. No answer. The rain outside increased and the noise echoed in the metal structure of the garage. I stood there trying to hear anything other than the rain, and that's when I noticed the most subtle sound of all. The garage door began to move. It was a long, heavy creak, the kind of sound the engine makes when someone presses the remote control to open. I looked at the wall where the control was always hanging. It was in the same place. No light came on the dashboard, and I knew my parents were in the room, too far away to hear. The wind that came in through the crack made the leaves on the ground spread. I ran to the car and tried to open the trunk manually, pulling with all my strength, but it was locked in a strange way, as if something was holding it inside. The sound of the door continued, rising little by little, and the cold wind began to enter hard. That's when I heard my brother, inside the car, whispering my name very softly. "Eli, there's someone here." The way he said my name left me paralyzed. His voice didn't sound like a joke, it was low, trembling, as if he was afraid to breathe loudly. I spent a few seconds trying to understand what he meant, and it was at that interval that the noise of the door motor suddenly stopped, leaving only the sound of the rain beating outside. The cold wind entered through the incomplete opening, and the shadows moved on the wall projected by the light of the street poles. I looked quickly at the opening of the garage, and I swear I saw something dark moving outside, an indefinite high form, stopped for a few seconds before disappearing into the darkness. I ran back to the car and told him to get out of there, but the trunk wouldn't open at all. He started beating inside, desperate, asking me to take him out. With each blow, I felt the vibration in the bodywork and the muffled sound of his voice, almost crying. I took the garage control and tried to close the door, but the button didn't respond. Just a dry click and nothing. The wind increased, and the noise of the metal hitting made the sound echo throughout the room. I screamed, calling my father, and at that moment, something fell hard in front of the car, as if someone had knocked over one of the big boxes. It was enough to make me retreat. The box rolled until it hit the front wheel. The noise made my heart race. I approached slowly, trying to see what had fallen, and realized that it was not a box, but my father's old tool bag, the one that was locked on the top shelf. It was open, the tools scattered on the floor as if someone had thrown it from up there. I looked at the corner of the garage and saw the aluminum ladder leaning against the place, but no movement. The sound of the wind came from the opening of the door, which now swayed a few centimeters up and down, creaking with each oscillation. The rain was beating hard, and the smell of wet earth invaded the air. I heard my brother hit again, harder, and the sound of him crying. I went to the car and tried to unlock the trunk by the spare key that was on the dashboard, but the button was loose, broken. My body began to tremble, and not only with fear. The cold inside was cutting. Then I heard footsteps. 3, maybe 4 slow steps on the concrete floor, coming from the direction of the partially open door. The sound was light but defined, like wet shoes dragging. I stood still, unable to move, with my gaze fixed on the crack illuminated by the pole. For a second, I saw the shadow of a foot. Then, nothing. The footsteps echoed slowly, one after the other, and their sound made the air in the garage seem colder. I didn't know if I should run inside the house or try to open the trunk anyway. I tilted my body a little, and through the opening of the door I saw the contour of something dark on the outside. I couldn't see it right. The pole light oscillated with the rain. But I swear I saw a standing silhouette, motionless, facing the garage. A thunder broke out, and at that moment, the shadow disappeared. I heard my brother crying softly again, saying that he had heard someone walking in there with him. That was enough to make me scream for help. My father came running in seconds with a flashlight and a scared expression. His light cut the dark of the garage, and as soon as he entered, the door motor moved by itself, closing completely. The noise was so loud that the sound echoed to the kitchen. I pointed to the car, shouting that Nate was stuck. My father came to the trunk and pulled it at once. The lid opened as if it had never stopped. My brother came out of there white, panting, and grabbed his arm. He said that while he was imprisoned, he had heard someone breathing near his face, and that the sound came from inside the car. My father looked inside the trunk and saw nothing but the emergency blankets and the stirpe. He passed the flashlight through every corner, then through the garage floor, but there was no one. The wind was still buzzing outside, and every time the rain hit the metal door, the sound seemed louder. When he went to the panel to turn off the automatic garage system, the control that was attached to the wall was no longer there. We kept looking, and we only found the device fallen outside near the entrance, soaked and covered in clay, as if someone had thrown it from inside. After we locked everything, we went up to the house. My parents tried to make us calm down, but Nate and I couldn't sleep. Every time the wind rocked a window, we held our breath. The next morning, when we went to the garage with my father to check, the control was still in the same place where he had left it, clean, dry, as if it had never fallen into the mud. And the strangest thing, There were footprints on the floor, only two going from the side of the car to the door. The floor mat was too big to be a child's, and the marks stopped right on the edge, as if the person had left and disappeared in the middle of the rain. Story 5. I was returning from a visit to my sister's house in Idaho, and I decided to take the mountain road to cut the way. It was a route I knew well, but I rarely did at night. It was almost 10:30 when I started climbing the steepest stretch, with the curves closed and the cliffs on one side. There was no cell phone signal, no lighting, only the headlight of my car illuminating the yellow double band and the constant sound of the engine. For a long time, I didn't cross with any vehicle. The silence and emptiness of the road gave me a strange feeling, as if the world had stopped. That's when I noticed lights behind me, two high headlights appearing out of nowhere in the previous curve, strong enough to reflect on the internal mirror and overshadow me. I thought it was a truck or someone with unregulated headlights, so I reduced it a little to let it pass. But the car behind also reduced. It kept the same distance, neither approached nor decreased too much, always the same. I found that strange because on that narrow road no one usually walks paired. At every turn the headlights swayed following the movement of my car, but they never moved away. The road was already starting to go down when I realized that the car was still there, firm behind me. The curves of that region were dangerous, so I tried to keep control and avoid looking so much in the rearview mirror, but it was impossible to ignore the constant brightness of the headlights blinding me. I signaled him to overtake me. Nothing. I reduced the speed on purpose, but the driver kept exactly the same distance, as if he measured every movement. I began to feel the wet steering wheel in my hands from sweating so much, and the tight stomach made me realize how tense my whole body was. After a few more minutes, I reached the most closed curve of the road, one of those where you can only see the rock wall on one side and the emptiness on the other. I reduced it a lot and looked quickly through the rearview mirror. The headlights were still there, strong, aligned, and seemed even closer. I made the curve slowly, feeling the car tilt slightly. When I turned the steering wheel and looked again, the headlights were gone. No tire noise, no braking noise, nothing. Only the silence of the mountain and the distant sound of the wind hitting the trees. I stared at the rearview mirror for long seconds, trying to see anything. The road behind was completely dark. I slowed down even more, hoping to see some lighthouse reappear in the next curve, but the pitch was still absolute. I thought the car might have stopped or fallen in some escape area, so I stopped on the side of the road to try to understand. I opened the window, and the silence was so great that even the engine of my car seemed too loud. No engine sound, no headlights coming from afar. It was as if the road had swallowed the other vehicle. I tried to rationalize. Maybe he had made the previous return or left by some side road, although I knew there was none on that stretch. I kept driving slowly, my heart still racing. After a few minutes, I began to convince myself that it was just a lost driver who probably took the wrong path and came back. But as I went up another curve, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The faint brightness of headlights back there, far away, flashing between the trees. The same tone of light, the same synchronized movements, accompanying me again, as if he had met me again. That vision paralyzed me for a few seconds. The headlights oscillated in the distance, approaching slowly, maintaining the same rhythm of my curves, as if they were following me from a distance, studying the right time to approach. I stepped on the accelerator, this time without thinking, and I felt the car shake as I climbed the slope. The engine roared, and the noise of the wind increased, but the brightness in the rearview mirror was still there, unshakable. I didn't know if I was getting paranoid or if it really happened, but the feeling of being followed was as real as the steering wheel in my hands. After about 5 minutes, I saw a small rest area with an old sign and a trash can. I put the car there and turned off the headlights, trying to see if the other vehicle would pass. I stood still, taking a deep breath, staring into the rearview mirror. The brightness appeared in the next curve, but something was different. The headlights now blinked irregularly, as if the car was swinging, or someone moving the lights on purpose. The light increased and decreased until suddenly it went out completely. I was waiting for the sound of the engine, the wind, anything. But there was nothing, neither echo nor movement. I stood still, with my hands locked on the steering wheel and my eyes fixed on the mirror. The silence was absolute. the kind of silence that makes the air seem heavy. I waited for more than a minute, but the engine sound never came. Just the distant noise of a branch dragging on the asphalt. I turned on the headlights again and my heart raced. On the side of the road, a metallic reflection appeared for a second, as if something had moved too fast. I stepped on the accelerator and left there as fast as I could. The road seemed endless, and fear made me squeeze the steering wheel until my hands hurt. When I finally arrived at a small village at the base of the mountain, I parked near a 24-hour gas station. The gas station attendant came to see me, and the first thing I asked was if he had seen a car like mine pass before. He replied that in the last few hours no vehicle had gone down that road. I asked to look at the security cameras at the gas station, and he showed me the monitor. There was my car entering alone, the asphalt completely empty behind me. I asked what time the recording was, and the clock in the video marked 2:14 a.m., exactly the same time I swore I saw the headlights shining in the curve. Story 6. I've been working as a night delivery man for a few years. I make routes through several small towns in the interior of Texas, taking orders from a restaurant that works until late. That night I remember leaving a little after 10, with 3 deliveries to do before closing the shift. Driving at night has always been quiet for me, less traffic, fewer people. But there was something strange in the air that morning. The sky was heavy, the wind stopped, and the streets seemed emptier than usual. I made the first delivery without problems, and when I returned to the road, I noticed something different in the rearview mirror. Back there, maintaining a considerable distance, came a van identical to mine. Same color, same model, until the company sticker glued on the side. I laughed alone, finding it too much coincidence, but I kept driving. When I turned right at an intersection, the vehicle did the same. I kept the speed for a while, and he continued exactly behind, neither closer nor further. I started to find it strange, so I purposely entered a side street, one of those neighborhood ones, to see if he would follow. He turned too. I tried not to panic. It could be another delivery man from the company, although I knew I was the only one scheduled at that time. I took my cell phone and opened the group of drivers. I asked if anyone was still on the street. No one answered. The van was still behind, always at the same distance, the low and constant headlights. I started paying attention to the details. The scratch on the bumper, the sticker on the rear window. Everything was the same as my car. Identical. Even the cell phone support glued to the corner of the panel, visible when its headlight reflected in the mirror. I entered a main avenue with traffic lights and some 24-hour stores, thinking that in the middle of the movement he would disappear. But he was still there. He seemed to observe every maneuver, every curve. When I stopped at the first red light, I looked through the interior mirror and saw the driver's reflection for the first time. The face was not clear. The brightness of the headlights hit the glass, but you could see the cap he was wearing. The same model as mine, black with the company logo. It was the moment when my body completely locked. I stared at the mirror, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence, someone from the same company, with the same uniform, delivering in the same region. But the more I watched, the less it made sense. I wore that cap a few days ago. It was a new model that only I had received from the manager, still without distribution to the other drivers. The signal opened, and instead of going straight, I turned left without giving an arrow. The other car did exactly the same, with the same reaction time, as if it had predicted my movement. My heart was beating so fast that I could barely breathe properly. I took an avenue that led out of the city, a dark road used to avoid traffic. The lights on the poles were left behind, and only the headlight of the other vehicle illuminated the path behind me. I tried to accelerate, but he kept the exact distance. It was like I was mirroring myself. Every curve, every brake, every movement, the same. After a few minutes, I started to sweat cold. The sound of his engine was the same, even the pace of the march. It was like driving looking at a reflection in the rearview mirror. The road went almost straight for about 3 kilometers before turning into an industrial area. I decided to enter there, thinking that he would have no reason to follow. I turned abruptly to the right, and the sound of the tires echoed loudly on the wet asphalt. When I looked through the mirror, I saw the headlights making the same movement. He didn't hesitate even for a second. That's when I noticed a detail that made me freeze. The plate was identical to mine. The same letters, the same numbers. The kind of thing impossible to happen by mistake. I was so stunned that I had to step on the brake to confirm what I had seen. The car behind did the same, stopped in exactly the same position at the same moment. I stood still, my heart beating in my neck. I turned on the flasher just to test it. He called too. I hung up. He hung up. It was as if he was imitating me on purpose. I lowered the window, trying to see the driver better, and I saw that he also lowered his, almost in the same second. The sound of the light rain hitting the hood was the only noise between us, and it was at that moment, when my car's headlight flashed because of the low battery, that I could see the other's face. The same face as mine. For a second, I thought I was going crazy. I blinked several times, rubbed my eyes, but the image didn't change. The man inside the car was identical to me. The same face shape, the same thin beard, the same black cap. He looked at me directly without blinking, with a neutral, almost curious expression. It was the kind of fear that has no name, a mixture of confusion and panic that leaves the body completely paralyzed. I opened my mouth to say something, but my throat locked. On the other side, he made the same movement as if he was imitating me. Then he smiled. Slowly, the same nervous smile I usually give when I'm uncomfortable. Then, without taking his eyes off me, he engaged the reverse. The engine made the same noise as mine, and the lights retreated, getting smaller until they disappeared in the curve. I stood still for a few seconds, breathing hard until I had the courage to start again. I went back to the city center and parked the car in front of the restaurant. When I left and closed the door, I looked at the reflection on the glass, and the cap I was wearing was no longer in my head. It was in the passenger seat, soaked in rain. Story 7. I work in a warehouse in the suburbs, and I usually leave around 11 at night. That kind of shift in which silence dominates the parking lot, only the sound of the machines turning off and the gates being locked. That night I remember that the wind was stopped and the air seemed heavy, as if the cold had frozen everything. I got in the car and started the engine, still a little tired. The parking lot was empty except for a black car stopped on the corner with the headlights off. I thought it was from some employee from the next shift, so I didn't care and followed the main avenue. After a few minutes, I noticed the same car in the rearview mirror. Low headlights, constant distance without overtaking. I changed lanes, and he changed too. I made the return at the next corner and took a completely different route than usual just to test. And it came along. It was too late for traffic, so there was no plausible explanation for someone to be following me. My whole body became tense. At each traffic light, I looked at the rearview mirror trying to see the driver's face, but the windshield was dark, and the interior of the car seemed completely erased. I started driving without a defined direction, trying to get as far away from the main streets as possible. I turned in alleys, passed through empty parking lots, changed direction several times. And yet the black car always reappeared, keeping the same distance, the same rhythm, as if it were glued to me by an invisible wire. The sound of the tires on the wet asphalt seemed to echo inside my head. I thought about stopping and facing it, but just the idea made me feel a chill in my stomach. Whoever it was, I was waiting for something. After almost 20 minutes of destinationless escape, I took courage and abruptly entered a lighted gas station. I parked near the convenience store, facing the entrance, to make sure someone could see me. I waited for the black car to show up around the corner, but it didn't. I kept looking at the rearview mirror with my sweaty hands on the steering wheel, taking a deep breath. 5 minutes have passed. 10. No sign of the car. I thought I had finally misled. I turned on the radio, tried to calm down, and stayed there for a few more minutes, watching the few cars passing on the avenue. When I finally decided to go back home, everything seemed normal again. I took the way home along a wider residential street, almost without movement at that time. The pole lights created long shadows on the wet asphalt, and the feeling of security began to return little by little. I still looked in the rearview mirror from time to time, but I only saw the emptiness of the street. No headlights, no engine sound behind me. As I got closer to my neighborhood, I began to convince myself that I had exaggerated. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe the guy was just going the same way. I tried to laugh at myself, but the laughter came out weak and nervous. I arrived at my street a little after midnight. The neighborhood was completely quiet. Only the distant sound of a dog and the snat of the engine cooling down when I parked the car. I closed the gate, looked to both sides, and everything seemed quiet. The morning air was cold and the light breeze made the trees sway slowly. I entered the house, left the keys on the bench, and went straight to the living room window, from where you could see the entire street. Dark, empty. I sighed with relief. I picked up my cell phone to send a message to my colleague saying that I had thought I was being followed, but everything was fine. That's when I noticed a faint glow at the end of the street. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of some distant lighthouse, maybe of a car turning on the main avenue. But the brightness didn't move. It pulsated, as if someone was turning on and off the lights. I approached the window and moved the curtain away slowly. At the end of the street, almost in the curve, 2 white headlights were facing my house. Stops. There was no engine sound, no noise, only the static brightness cutting through the darkness. The heart began to speed up again. I kept watching, trying to distinguish the shape of the car, and I had no doubt it was the same black vehicle. I stood there for long seconds with my body completely still, as if any movement could denounce that I was looking. The lights remained on for a while, until they suddenly went out. The street was plunged into total darkness. I don't know how long I stared, waiting for something to happen. The silence seemed louder and louder. I took a few steps back, trying to convince myself that it was just someone turning the car around, until I heard the dry and muffled sound of an engine starting again, and the headlights turned on once again, only now with the car a few meters closer. My body locked. I didn't think about calling the police nor about leaving home. I just stood there, paralyzed, watching as the headlights went out and turned on at irregular intervals, as if someone was playing with the switch. Every time the light came back, the car seemed to be a little closer. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was an illusion because of the darkness. Maybe the distance deceived me. But when the lights came on for the 4th time, I saw clearly. The car was now halfway down the street. I moved away from the window and crouched behind the sofa, my heart beating hard enough for me to hear inside my ears. The room was dark. Only the faint brightness of the TV turned off, reflecting my silhouette. The sound of the engine stopped completely, and the silence was worse than the noise. I waited for minutes that seemed like hours, until I got the courage to look again. I got up slowly and pulled the curtain with 2 fingers. The street was empty. No headlights, no car, only the wind passing through the leaves. And then outside, a metallic click echoed, the sound of my backyard gate opening. Story 8. I had spent the weekend at a friend's house, and I left around 11:30 to return to my city. It was a short trip, less than 2 hours, but the road was practically deserted at that time. I remember that the sky was clear, the radio turned on low, and the sound of the music was the only thing that kept me awake. I played a random playlist, and at one point, a song I loved started, Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. The road was dark, only the headlights of my car illuminating the asphalt, and the sound was comforting in a strange way. That's when I noticed something through the rearview mirror. A car was coming behind, not too close, with the headlights down. Nothing unusual, until I noticed something curious. The dim light of the headlight followed exactly the rhythm of my speed. If I reduced, he reduced. If I accelerated a little, he did the same. I thought it was a coincidence until the moment I paid more attention and realized that, even with the windows closed, I could hear a weak music coming from outside. It was the same sound as Fleetwood Mac, in the same part of the music that played in my car. For a few seconds, I thought I was imagining. I lowered the volume of my radio, and the sound was still there. The same beat, the same voice, coming from the car behind me. It was impossible to hear clearly, but you could recognize the chorus mixing with the sound of the engine. That gave me goosebumps. I changed the station on purpose, just to confirm that it wasn't a coincidence. I put it in a country station, random, and I waited. A few seconds later, the sound coming from outside changed too. The same song, the same sequence of verses. My heart started racing. I turned on the high beam by reflex, looking in the mirror, trying to see the other driver. The car was dark, maybe black or navy blue, and the interior lights were off. I couldn't see anyone inside. I accelerated a little, trying to get away, but he kept the exact distance without approaching or disappearing. I went back to the radio and changed stations again, now to one with news. A couple of seconds later, the announcer's voice echoed outside, repeating the same words, slightly delayed. It was like hearing an echo coming from the dark. For a few seconds, I was in complete silence inside the car, trying to process what was happening. I took the cell phone and checked if the Bluetooth was not connected to some other device. Nothing. It was just my car radio and that sound coming from the other vehicle behind me, repeating everything I heard. I started to change stations quickly, jumping between songs and commercials. And with each change, the car behind followed. The delay interval was only 2 or 3 seconds, as if someone was listening to the sound of my car and playing it right after. The situation started to make me terrified. I slowed down, hoping he would overtake me, but it didn't happen. He kept the exact distance without ever getting too close. The panel lights trembled as my heart accelerated, and I felt a chill go up my neck. I decided to leave the main road and enter a secondary road that cut a more rural stretch, without lighting. I thought he would give up on following me, but when I looked through the rearview mirror, I saw his headlights making the same curve. And that's when I noticed something even more disturbing. Now the music was synchronized with mine without any delay, as if it were playing in the same car. The sound was so clear that it seemed impossible for it to come from another vehicle. The road was deserted, without houses, without lights, only the double lane illuminated by my headlights, and that identical sound, mixing with mine. The chorus of the song played in perfect synchrony, as if the two cars were connected to the same radio. I opened the window and the cold wind came in, but the sound didn't decrease. He came from behind, firm, loud enough to vibrate in the air. The car behind seemed glued to mine, and I no longer knew if I was listening to the music or imagining it. I turned off the radio completely. Inside the car, the silence was total, until seconds later the music continued. But now it came exclusively from outside, the same track, at the same point where I had turned it off. I felt my stomach turn. I accelerated and the other car did the same. The notes of the music echoed down the road as if the speakers were facing me directly. When the road made a long curve, I thought I'd try to mislead him. I reduced it a little and suddenly the sound stopped. No music, no lighthouse in the mirror. Nothing but the darkness and the noise of my panting engine. I kept driving, but my hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold the steering wheel. The silence was so deep that even the sound of the engine seemed distorted. I looked through the rearview mirror once, twice, 3 times, no light behind. I started to think that maybe I had imagined everything. The brain does strange things when we drive for a long time at dawn. I decided to stop on the side of the road to breathe. I turned off the engine and just listened to the wind. The smell of wet earth came from the surrounding plantations. For a moment, the world seemed to return to normal. But then the sound came back. First very low, like a distant buzz. Then sharper, it was the same song coming out of some point behind me. I turned my body slowly and saw about 50 meters away 2 headlights lighting up. The melody got louder, each note getting closer until I could hear the singer's voice repeating the same verse that had stopped minutes before. I got into the car in a hurry and started the engine. As soon as I accelerated, the other car also accelerated. The music played so loud that it seemed to involve me, as if the whole road was singing along. Story 9. It was almost midnight when my friend Luke and I decided to take a rural shortcut to cut about 20 minutes of the return trip. We had spent the day in a neighboring town helping my cousin with a move, and I just wanted to get home soon. The GPS showed a secondary road, almost without traffic, which crossed some farms. The air was humid, the fog began to form, and the only sound was the old engine of my sedan. We talked little, that kind of natural silence that comes after a long day. It was only after a few kilometers that we noticed the lights behind us. 2 high headlights coming in a straight line, slowly approaching. I thought it was a coincidence, maybe another car using the same shortcut, but the more curves we made, the clearer it became. The vehicle kept exactly the same distance as if it were accompanying us on purpose. The brightness of the headlights was strong, almost too white to be normal. Luke turned to me and asked if I knew anyone who drove a black SUV. I said no. He kept looking at the rearview mirror, tense, and said something that made me freeze. This car was already at the highway exit, remember? The moment he said that, the stomach turned. I tried to remember the stretch of the highway, and really, there was a black SUV stopped on the side of the road, half hidden, when we took the exit to the shortcut. I thought it was a coincidence, but now the same car was behind us, maintaining a constant pace. I slowed down to see if he passed, but he slowed down too. When I accelerated, he accelerated along. The road was narrow with no wide shoulder, and the tall bush on both sides made everything seem more claustrophobic. The sound of the tires in the gravel echoed as if we were in a tunnel. Luke took his cell phone to try to film, but the signal was too weak. The GPS app crashed all the time, showing the car stopped at the same point. The feeling of isolation was suffocating. No one else passed by, and the few old houses we saw were completely erased. I decided to turn on a dirt road to try to mislead. The SUV followed again. His headlights illuminated the trees behind, creating shadows that seemed to move. "Bro, speed up," Luke said, almost whispering. I did that, but the road ended abruptly on an old and rusty sign. Dead end. I struck hard on the brake, and the car skidded a little on the wet dirt before stopping. The lighthouse illuminated the wire fence and the open field ahead. There was no more road. Luke looked at me, pale. "And now?" he asked, as the SUV's headlights slowly approached. The sound of the gravel being crushed by the tires was getting louder and louder until it stopped about 20 meters behind us. The lights remained on for a few seconds, then went out at once. We were immersed in complete darkness, only with the sound of breathing and the engine still on. "Turn on the reverse and get out of here," Luke whispered, but I hesitated. The road was narrow and maneuvering in the dark would be risky. I looked through the rearview mirror and only saw the vague outline of the SUV, a still silhouette completely motionless. No headlights, no internal light. The only indication that there was someone there was the slight noise of something creaking, maybe the bench, maybe a door. I waited for some movement, but nothing happened. I turned off the engine to try to hear better. The silence was so absolute that even the distant sound of the crickets seemed to stop. That immobility started to drive me crazy. Luke said softly for me to reverse anyway, but the fear of missing the curve and falling into the ditch next to it made me stand still. The air inside the car seemed denser every second. Then the sound came, a slight metallic touch as if someone had hit the hood of the SUV with his finger. Then silence again. I waited a whole minute, and nothing. I lit the high beam, and the light reflected on the black bodywork of the other car, revealing that the driver was still there. I could see the silhouette in the front seat, motionless, looking straight at us. "Man, he's looking here," Luke said, his voice trembling. I lowered the glass a little to listen and immediately regretted it. A cold wind came in, bringing the strong smell of wet earth and gasoline. Outside, no engine could be heard. The SUV was turned off. No light, no sound. Only that black shape against the darkness. I started the engine again, determined to get out of there anyway. I hitched the reverse slowly, the tires sliding on the clay. At the same moment, the SUV turned on the headlights, at once strong, straight into our car, blinding everything. The light was so intense that for a few seconds I couldn't see anything but the pure white invading the interior of the car. Luke raised his arm to protect his eyes, screaming for me to back up. I did this without thinking, accelerating hard, and the car started to shake on the gravel. The SUV's headlights were still fixed, motionless, accompanying me while I maneuvered. The heartbeat so hard that it sounded like a sound inside the head. When I managed to align the car and take the way back, its headlights went out again, leaving the road immersed in darkness. I drove without looking back, all the time waiting to see those lights appear again in the rearview mirror. The road seemed endless, and the noise of the stones under the tires was the only sound. After about 10 minutes, we reached the main highway and entered without even reducing. Only when I saw other cars did I feel my body relax a little. Luke kept looking back until he finally said, almost in a whisper, "He's not coming anymore." We didn't say anything else until we got to the city. When I stopped to leave him at home, he came down quietly, but before closing the door, he looked at me and said, "Look at the rearview mirror." I turned my head slowly with short breath, and there they were, two distant, immobile lighthouses right at the end of the street. Small, but unmistakable. The same yellowish tone, the same height. Luke saw it too, and for a moment neither of them said anything. It was as if that car was just waiting for me to move again. I closed the windows and started, my whole body shaking. I drove in the opposite direction, trying not to look back anymore, but the brightness of the lights was reflected in the side mirror, always at the same point, without approaching or disappearing. I got home more than half an hour later with my hands hurting from squeezing the steering wheel so much. I parked and waited a few minutes inside the car, trying to find the courage to get out. The neighborhood was quiet, and the lights on the poles blinked from time to time. When I finally opened the gate and entered, I felt the cold air hitting my face and forced myself to look down the street, just to be sure. I sighed with relief and entered the house. But just before closing the door, I heard the distant sound of an engine starting. I went to the window and saw, at the end of the street, the same black SUV stopped. The engine turned off again and the headlights went out as if they had never been there. Story 10. I was returning from a work trip, crossing a practically deserted interstate highway. It was just after midnight, and the stretch I was driving cut through a rural area. No signal, no lights, nothing but the straight and dark road ahead. The car radio picked up badly, so I could only hear the constant sound of the tires on the asphalt. After about 30 minutes alone, I saw something through the rearview mirror, a lonely, weak point of light that blinked from time to time. It looked like the headlight of a motorcycle. At first I didn't care. Bikers usually ride fast around there, and the unique lighthouse is something common. But as the minutes passed, I began to realize that that light never changed position. It didn't get closer. It didn't get any further away. It was always at the exact same point as the rearview mirror with the same intensity. It was as if the bike was attached at the same distance, following every movement I made. I changed lanes, and the light changed too. I reduced it a little, waiting for it to pass, but it didn't happen. She was still there, motionless, as if mirrored. That constancy started to make me uneasy. I turned on the radio just to break the silence, but the hissing sound of the stations out of tune only made me more nervous. I looked at the rearview mirror every few seconds, waiting for the light to move, but it remained the same, stable, without the slightest tremor. The strange thing is that there wasn't the slightest engine sound. On a silent road like that, the snoring of a motorcycle should be audible from afar, but the only sound was that of the wind passing through the cracks of the car. After about 10 minutes, the discomfort turned into real fear. I started changing lanes on purpose, accelerating and braking without a pattern, to see if the motorcyclist reacted. The light followed all the movements as if it were attached to my mirror. I tried to rationalize it could be the reflection of some distant lighthouse or even my own lighthouse reflecting on something behind. But there was nothing nearby. No pole, no car coming in the opposite direction. Nothing that could explain. Only that fixed light point, pulsating in a soft, almost hypnotic way. The road seemed to repeat itself in an infinite cycle. Same double lane, same signs, same smooth curves. And the headlight was still there, as if it were part of the car. I started to feel my neck hurt from looking so much in the rearview mirror. At one point, I decided to turn off my car's high beam to see if the backlight reacted. As soon as I did this, the point in the mirror flashed, decreasing in intensity, as if responding. I waited a few seconds and he shone stronger again, exactly at the same point. I knew that a motorcycle could not maintain distance and light intensity so perfectly for so long. I started to pay attention to the details. The color of the light was yellowish, old, like the headlight bulbs from decades ago. And the road was totally new, paved a short time ago. No one would use an old motorcycle around there. I began to feel the sweat running down my back, even with the air conditioning on. I decided to stop at a station that appeared on the GPS about 5 kilometers away. I accelerated, trying not to look in the mirror, but I couldn't. The light was still there, firm, motionless. When I finally saw the lights of the post in front, something inside me relaxed for a second. and it was at that moment that I realized that the headlight behind had disappeared. I looked in the rearview mirror several times, hoping to see the brightness reappear, but the road behind was completely dark. No lighthouse, no reflection, just the total pitch. I had the strange feeling that it was still there, just invisible. I slowed down and put the car near the pumps of the gas station, which seemed to be closed, only the automatic lights on. The sound of the engine was too loud inside the silence. I waited a minute before hanging up. When I did, the noise of the wind and the distant sound of insects took over. I got out of the car to try to see the road better, but the cold of the dawn cut my skin and the air seemed still. I looked back, trying to focus on the darkness, but there was nothing. No motorcycle sound approaching, no movement. I stayed there for a few seconds, standing there, breathing slowly, until something caught my attention. The side mirror of the car reflected a dim light, oscillating very lightly. I looked inside and my heart froze. The internal mirror also reflected the same brightness, coming from exactly the same position as before, but there was nothing behind the car. No headlights, no motorcycles. Only the light trapped in the reflection. By instinct, I got back in the car and closed the door tightly, trying to convince myself that it was just the reflection of the gas station lamps. But the light was still there, small and motionless, right in the center of the internal mirror. It was impossible to ignore. I turned the car to the opposite side, pointing the headlights at the road, and the light in the mirror remained in exactly the same position. She didn't move, she didn't tremble. She only existed there, as if she were part of the glass. I took the phone to shoot, but the camera didn't capture anything. The reflection just didn't appear on the screen. The air inside the car got heavy. The sound of my heartbeat seemed to echo in my ears. I stared at the mirror for a time that I couldn't say, hypnotized by that fixed point. Suddenly, the light began to dim until it disappeared completely, leaving only my own reflection looking back at me. I sighed, feeling my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and started the engine. I left there as fast as I could. Only when I got close to the city did I realize the detail that made me lose my breath. The reflection was still there, very small, very discreet, but this time, not in the rearview mirror. It came from the dark surface of my own eye, flashing at the same rhythm as the lighthouse.
Thank you for staying until the end of this video. It's amazing to have you here accompanying me until the end of the stories. If you liked it, leave your comment telling what was the story that moved you the most. And if you are not yet registered, sign up so you don't miss the next ones. Until next night of scary stories.